There are days in the astrological calendar that carry the weight of decades, not because they are louder than other days, or because the sky is doing something obviously dramatic, but because something that was in one place for a very long time has moved. And when it moves, a whole architecture of reality moves with it. April 26, 2026 is one of those days. Yesterday, at the threshold between Saturday and Sunday, Uranus crossed out of Taurus and stepped for the first time in 84 years into Gemini. And while that movement happened technically at the cusp of 2 calendar days, you are living inside its activation right now. The crossing is complete. The new era has begun. And if something in you feels different this morning, like the atmosphere has a different texture, like your thoughts are moving at a slightly different speed, like there is an aliveness behind your eyes that was not quite there a week ago, that is not your imagination. That is Uranus in Gemini announcing itself through the one instrument it has always used most reliably: you. Before we go further, I want to put something in front of you. Because what you are inside right now, this specific turning point, the moment something in you stops performing and starts becoming entirely yours, this moment has a cosmic shape that is particular to you. Not to your sign, not to the collective energy, to your birth chart, your soul contract. Your specific karmic signature with this life, a personal astrology reading, is built from your coordinates alone. Your name, your date of birth, your time of birth, your place of birth. What you receive is not a general reading. It is a map of your specific journey read through the actual blueprint of your chart, where you are right now in this chapter, what the universe is currently building around you, what your soul contract truly contains beneath the surface of what you can see from inside it. You get a personal audio reading delivered straight to your inbox and a detailed written report you will return to again and again as the stages unfold. The link is in the description. 84 years is not a small number. The last time Uranus was at 0 degrees Gemini, the world was in the middle of something it had never experienced before. Technology was reshaping warfare, communication systems were being stretched to their absolute limits, and the way human beings understood their connection to one another across distance was being permanently rewritten. That was 1941. The world that existed when Uranus left Gemini and the world that existed when it returned looked almost nothing alike. 7 years of Uranus in a sign does not simply influence the era it occupies, it defines it. Uranus is the planet of radical disruption, of the quantum leap that bypasses the ordinary mechanics of cause and effect and lands somewhere entirely new. It is the planet of the breakthrough that nobody planned and everybody needed, of the invention that changes the question entirely, not just the answer, of the awakening that arrives not because you worked your way toward it through careful incremental effort, but because something in the field of consciousness simply shifted, and suddenly you could see something you had never been able to see before. Uranus does not evolve slowly. It erupts, it flashes, it rewires. And Gemini, the sign it has now entered, is the sign of the mind itself, of language and information and the invisible infrastructure through which human beings transmit thought to one another across time and space. Gemini is the sign of the messenger, of the twin, of the intelligence that can hold two things at once and find the relationship between them. It is the sign of curiosity, of the restless intellect that cannot stay in one place because everywhere it looks, there is something new to understand. It is the sign of the spoken word, of the written word, of the code and the signal and the broadcast and the whisper. When Uranus moves into Gemini, the electricity of revolutionary disruption enters the domain of thought, language, communication, and the systems through which ideas become real. What this means at the collective level is something you can already feel beginning to surface. The way information moves, the way ideas spread, the way human beings talk to each other and about each other, the way knowledge is stored and transmitted and distorted and reclaimed, all of it is entering a period of radical reconstruction. The last Uranus in Gemini cycle witnessed the emergence of radio as a mass communication technology, the acceleration of code breaking and signal intelligence, the birth of new media forms that compressed distance into something that no longer functioned the way geography once insisted. The current cycle will have its own disruptions, its own breakthroughs, its own moments where the way you think about thinking is suddenly no longer adequate to contain what is being revealed. But the collective story is not the only story, and it is not even the most important one for understanding what today means for you. Personally, Uranus always works outward from the individual. It awakens the self first and reorganizes the world through the accumulated pressure of awakened selves. So before you think about what Uranus in Gemini means for technology or communication systems, or the way language will evolve over the next 7 years, think about what it means for the particular mind that you carry, for the way your specific intelligence works, for the beliefs you have held without examining because there was no pressure yet to examine them, for the conversations you have been avoiding because the words did not yet feel available or safe or real enough to speak, for the ideas that have been forming in you just beneath the level of articulation, waiting for a frequency that could finally give them shape. Uranus in Gemini is that frequency, and today it is fully active. Today, the planet that represents the part of consciousness that refuses to remain confined by what it has previously agreed to understand has entered the sign that governs the mechanics of understanding itself. Something in the way you think is going to change, not because you have decided to change it, because a door opened at the level of possibility that was not open before. And now that the door is open, the mind that was perfectly comfortable with its previous architecture is going to find that architecture suddenly insufficient. And that insufficiency is the beginning of everything. Uranus entering Gemini does not exist alone in today's sky. It arrives inside a specific planetary configuration that shapes its character and determines which frequencies of its energy are most active and most available right now. Understanding the full picture of today's sky is essential, because the context changes the meaning in ways that matter. The Sun is in the early degrees of Taurus. Taurus season began just days ago, and the contrast with the extended Aries fire that dominated this month could not be more striking. Aries is the sign of the new beginning, the forward thrust, the willingness to move before the ground is confirmed solid beneath you. Taurus is the sign that takes what Aries has initiated and asks whether it can be built into something real. Taurus is the sign of form, of earth, of the patient intelligence that knows that beginning well is not the same as sustaining well, and that sustainability is ultimately the test of every vision. The Sun in Taurus today provides a grounding counterweight to the electric, accelerating quality of Uranus entering Gemini. It is the steadying presence that keeps today's awakening from becoming overwhelming. It says, something new is arriving, yes, and you have the capacity to hold it, to give it form, to make it something that lasts beyond the initial shock of its arrival. Saturn is in Aries, moving through the middle degrees of that sign. Saturn has been in Aries since February, and its presence there has been defining a period of construction on honest foundations. Saturn in Aries is the long, patient work of building a self that does not collapse under its own weight. It is the discipline applied to the Aries impulse, the willingness to commit to a direction not because it feels thrilling in the moment, but because it is genuinely yours. Saturn's position in Aries today creates an important background condition for everything Uranus in Gemini is activating. The new thoughts that surface today, the new ways of understanding that Uranus is opening in you, they are not arriving into a vacuum. They are arriving into a structure that Saturn has been building. They have somewhere to land. They have a framework to reorganize. This is different from the kind of Uranian disruption that has no container, that scatters rather than reorganizes. Today's awakening is the kind that finds its home. Neptune is also in Aries, as it has been since January. Neptune in Aries is a slow, visionary presence that is gradually dissolving the old crystallized ideas of what it means to be a self in the world, and replacing them with something more porous, more spiritually attuned, more honest about the degree to which identity is a living thing rather than a fixed destination. Neptune in Aries together with Saturn in Aries has been the defining outer planet signature of this year, the slow simultaneous pressure of dissolution and construction in the sign of new beginnings. Today, Uranus in Gemini forms an off-sign sextile to this Aries cluster, a flowing conversation between the mental revolution happening in Gemini and the identity reconstruction happening in Aries. The new thinking that Uranus opens in you today is not unrelated to the deeper work of self-reinvention that this entire year has been demanding. The two processes are in dialogue. What you are coming to understand in your mind and what you are coming to rebuild in your fundamental sense of who you are, these are the same project approached from different angles. Venus entered Gemini just a day before Uranus, and this sequence matters. Venus is the planet of what we love, what we value, and who and what we are drawn toward with genuine desire. When Venus entered Gemini, it opened the domain of the mind to beauty, to the pleasure of ideas, to the kind of attraction that begins with curiosity and deepens through conversation. Venus in Gemini finds love in words, in wit, in the quicksilver intelligence that can shift perspective without losing its essential warmth. Venus in Gemini now shares its sign with Uranus. The planet of value and love is in the same sign as the planet of radical liberation. What you find beautiful may shift today. What you desire in connection, in conversation, in the exchange of minds, may reorganize itself around a frequency that is more alive, more original, more genuinely yours than what you have previously settled for. This is not instability, this is refinement. Venus and Uranus together in Gemini are asking, what do you actually love to think about? And are you allowing yourself to pursue that fully? Mercury, the ruler of Gemini and therefore the planet that governs Uranus's new home sign, is in Aries today and forming an exact square to Jupiter in Cancer. This is a significant aspect that adds both tension and expansion to the overall sky. Mercury squared Jupiter is the aspect of the thought that is almost too big for the mind currently containing it. It is the understanding that is trying to arrive but keeps bumping into the edges of the existing framework. Jupiter in Cancer is emotional wisdom, the kind of knowing that lives in the gut and the heart rather than in the analytical mind. Mercury in Aries is the quick, direct, impulsive intelligence that moves fast and trusts its first instinct. When these two form a square, there is a productive friction between the intuitive, emotional knowing of Jupiter in Cancer and the sharp forward motion of Mercury in Aries. You may feel today that you are simultaneously receiving more insight than you can immediately process and more urgency to act on what you know than is quite justified by how much you have processed. This is the Mercury-Jupiter square speaking. The invitation is not to suppress either the insight or the urgency, but to hold both in creative tension until they clarify into something you can actually use. Venus is exactly sextile Neptune today, adding a dimension of spiritual beauty and inspired vision to everything Venus in Gemini is already opening. Venus sextile Neptune is the aspect of the ideal made perceptible, of the beautiful idea that is also spiritually true, of the conversation that somehow touches something sacred. In Gemini and Aries, respectively, this sextile connects inspired thought with dissolving vision, the particular kind of mental beauty that opens rather than closes, that reveals rather than concludes. If you have a creative project, a piece of writing, a conversation you have been wanting to initiate, a way of understanding something you love that has felt just out of reach, today's Venus-Neptune sextile creates an unusually fertile opening for that kind of inspired, spiritually attuned thinking to surface. The moon is in Virgo, having entered that sign late yesterday evening. The Virgo moon is the part of the emotional field that wants to make sense of things, to organize the information into something useful, to apply the understanding rather than simply receive it. In a sky as electrically charged as today's, the Virgo moon is both a useful anchor and a potential source of friction. It will want to categorize what Uranus is opening before the opening is complete. It will want to find the practical application before the revelation has fully arrived. The invitation is to let the Virgo moon do what it does well, which is to ground and organize and discern without allowing it to close prematurely what Uranus is working to open. Some things need to be understood before they can be organized, and some days need to be felt through before they can be analyzed. Today is one of those days. Jupiter remains in Cancer, moving through the degrees it has occupied for most of this year. Jupiter in Cancer is the expansion of emotional intelligence, the deepening of the relationship with home and belonging, and the authentic inner life. Jupiter in Cancer sextiles the Sun in Taurus today, a quiet, stabilizing flow of abundance between the two most grounded and nourishing forces in the current sky. Even as Uranus rewires the mind, Jupiter and the Sun are providing a background note of genuine emotional stability and material groundedness. You are not being untethered today, you are being upgraded. When astrologers speak of Uranus's 84-year cycle, they are speaking about the length of time it takes Uranus to travel all the way around the zodiac and return to the point where it began. 84 years is also the approximate length of a human lifetime lived well, which means that in one human life, Uranus completes one full circle, one full revolution through every sign, one full visit to every domain of the zodiac. Most people experience Uranus in each sign exactly once in their lifetime. This is Uranus in Gemini, and for the vast majority of people alive today, this is the only time they will experience this transit. That fact alone changes the way you should receive what is happening today. This is not a repeating pattern. This is not something you have moved through before in this lifetime and will move through again. This is new. What Uranus opens in the domain of Gemini over the next 7 years, the particular quality of mental awakening, communicative liberation, and intellectual revolution that is activated by this transit, you are experiencing for the first and only time. And the decisions you make, the directions you choose, the ideas you pursue or abandon, the conversations you begin or end during this period will shape the remainder of your life in ways that cycles of shorter duration simply cannot. The people who were alive during the last Uranus in Gemini transit, those who experienced it between 1941 and 1949, went through a period that utterly transformed their understanding of what was possible in human communication, human conflict, and human connection. Many of them described that period, in retrospect, as the one that most clearly divided their lives into a before and an after. Not because the events of those years were unprecedented in historical terms, though many of them were, but because the inner experience of living through a Uranus transit in the sign that governs the mind produced a specific kind of rewiring that they carried for the rest of their lives. You are beginning that period now. And the key thing to understand about a Uranus transit is that its effects are not delivered all at once. The door opens at 0 degrees Gemini, which is where Uranus stands today. But the rooms behind that door reveal themselves gradually as Uranus moves through each successive degree of the sign over the next 7 years. What you understand today about what this transit means for you is necessarily incomplete. You are at the threshold. The full architecture of the cycle is not yet visible from this vantage point, but the threshold itself is real and it is open and you are standing in it right now. What Uranus in Gemini asks of you is not a grand gesture or an immediate transformation. It asks something more subtle and more demanding than that. It asks you to remain curious, to resist the settling into fixed conclusions that is the mind's natural preference, to stay in relationship with the question rather than rushing to the answer. Gemini energy is always about the journey between two poles, not the arrival at either one. And Uranus in Gemini is specifically about the kind of mental journey that does not know its destination in advance because the destination is being created by the traveling itself. There are things you currently believe that will not survive this transit intact. Not because they are false in any simple sense, but because the 7 years of Uranus in Gemini will expand your capacity for understanding to the point where the beliefs you hold today simply cannot contain everything you will come to know. This is not a warning, it is an invitation. The mind that you leave this transit with will be genuinely larger than the mind you have today. Larger in its capacity for nuance, larger in its tolerance for complexity, larger in its ability to hold multiple truths simultaneously without needing them to resolve into a single answer. The 84-year cycle began today. You are at the beginning. And beginnings, when you understand what they are, do not require you to know where they end. While Uranus claims the headline of this day, the Venus-Neptune sextile forming simultaneously is not a minor supporting player. It is one of the most genuinely beautiful aspects available in the astrological vocabulary, and its exact perfection today, on the same day that Uranus enters Gemini, creates a quality of experience that is both electrically awakened and deeply, dreamily inspired. Venus in Gemini sextile Neptune in Aries is the meeting of the beautiful thought with the dissolving vision. Venus in Gemini is in love with ideas, with words, with the play of intelligence in conversation. It finds pleasure in the quick exchange, in the wit that arrives at unexpected angles, in the moment when two minds meet and something new is created in the space between them that neither mind could have produced alone. This is not a sentimental Venus, it is a curious one. A Venus that values understanding as highly as it values feeling, and that finds the act of genuine communication one of the most intimate experiences available to a human being. Neptune in Aries adds a quality of inspired dissolution to this. Neptune does not deal in the sharp edges of precise definition. It deals in the atmosphere, in the felt sense of something, in the experience of meaning that exceeds the capacity of any single word to contain. When Venus in Gemini reaches toward Neptune, the beauty it encounters is the kind that cannot be fully articulated, only approached through language that knows its own inadequacy and chooses the most resonant approximation it can find. This is the aspect of the poet, of the songwriter, of the teacher whose words somehow transmit not just information, but a quality of presence that changes the listener. Of the conversation that ends and leaves you feeling that you have been seen in a way that exceeds what was literally said. On this particular day, with Uranus simultaneously opening the mind to a new 7-year chapter and Mercury squaring Jupiter across the sky, the Venus-Neptune sextile operates as a kind of spiritual permission. Permission to let the new thoughts that are arriving be beautiful as well as true. Permission to bring the quality of vision and inspired feeling into the intellectual awakening that Uranus is initiating. Permission to understand that the revolution Uranus in Gemini is beginning is not only cognitive, but also aesthetic. Not only about what you know, but about how you feel about knowing it. Not only about the content of your thinking, but about the quality of aliveness that genuine thinking carries when it is connected to something that genuinely matters to you. There are conversations available today that will not be available tomorrow in the same way. The combination of Venus sextile Neptune and Uranus, newly in Gemini, creates a specific quality of communicative openness that is unusually rare and unusually generative. If there is something you have been wanting to say but have not known how to say, today's sky creates a frequency within which the words may come more easily. Not because the sky is providing the words for you, but because the specific resonance of Venus in Gemini sextile Neptune in Aries lowers the resistance between what you feel and what you can articulate. The gap between inner experience and outer expression, which is usually significant, narrows today. The Virgo moon is the one energy that can complicate this. The Virgo impulse is to edit, to refine, to second-guess the intuitive expression in favor of the technically correct one. With the Virgo moon active alongside Venus sextile Neptune, you may find yourself reaching for an inspired thought and then immediately questioning whether it is accurate enough, precise enough, properly qualified. The invitation is to let the inspiration arrive first. Virgo's gift is discernment, not suppression. Let what wants to surface. Let it be beautiful and imperfect and alive. Virgo can help you refine it afterward. But Virgo cannot help you receive what Neptune and Venus together are trying to offer if it is busy dismissing the transmission before it completes. The dreams available today both the sleeping kind and the waking kind, the visions and the aspirations and the sudden intuitive knowing that arrives sideways when you are not trying to force it. These are carrying information that belongs to the new chapter. Write them down, speak them aloud. Do not assume they are too large or too strange or too difficult to be real. Uranus in Gemini will spend the next 7 years teaching you that your mind is larger than you previously believed it to be. Venus sextile Neptune is today's first lesson in that curriculum. The third significant aspect, perfecting on April 26th, is Mercury in Aries forming an exact square to Jupiter in Cancer. This is a more challenging and more internally demanding aspect than either the Uranus ingress or the Venus-Neptune sextile, and its specific character today deserves careful attention because it will shape the texture of how you process everything else the sky is offering. Mercury in Aries is the mind at its most direct, most impulsive, and most confident in its initial reading of a situation. Aries does not encourage Mercury to deliberate. It encourages Mercury to speak, to decide, to commit, to move forward on the strength of its first understanding without waiting for further confirmation. This can be one of Mercury's most useful expressions in signs where directness is both warranted and welcome. But it can also be the expression that outruns its own accuracy, that mistakes speed for correctness, that confuses the confidence of a first impression with the completeness of a full understanding. Jupiter in Cancer is a very different kind of intelligence. Jupiter expands whatever it occupies, and in Cancer it expands the emotional dimension of knowing, the capacity to feel the deeper truth of a situation rather than simply analyze it. Jupiter in Cancer is wisdom that comes through the body, through the gut response, through the sudden welling of feeling that arises when something true is said in the right way to the right person at the right moment. It is the kind of knowing that cannot always be justified in logical terms, but that tends to be accurate in ways that purely analytical knowing sometimes misses. Jupiter in Cancer is also the intelligence of the long view, of the understanding that what matters most is not always what is most immediately visible, that depth is more significant than speed, and that the emotional truth of something is not a softer truth, but often a more fundamental one. When Mercury in Aries squares Jupiter in Cancer, these two forms of intelligence enter a friction that is, in the best possible expression of this aspect, enormously productive. The directness and speed of Mercury in Aries needs the depth and emotional resonance of Jupiter in Cancer to become something more than clever. The emotional wisdom of Jupiter in Cancer needs the directness and momentum of Mercury in Aries to become something more than vague. The square forces them into relationship, and that relationship, while uncomfortable in the moment, tends to produce understanding that neither form of intelligence could generate alone. What you may experience today is a quality of mental stretching that feels slightly too large for your current capacity to hold. Ideas arriving before you have the framework to process them. Emotional knowing that exceeds your ability to articulate it. A sense that you are understanding something important about a situation, but cannot yet find the words that would make that understanding communicable to another person. A frustration between the speed at which your mind wants to move and the depth at which the understanding needs to settle before it becomes fully usable. The invitation of Mercury square Jupiter is not to resolve this tension by choosing one form of intelligence over the other. It is to stay inside the productive discomfort of holding both simultaneously, to let the quick mind keep moving while the deeper knowing catches up, to let the emotional wisdom inform the analytical speed without replacing it. The synthesis that becomes available when you do this is significantly richer than what either form of intelligence produces in isolation. On this specific day, with Uranus newly in Gemini and Venus sextile Neptune also active, the Mercury-Jupiter square has an additional dimension. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini. When Mercury squares Jupiter on the same day that Uranus enters the sign Mercury rules, there is a sense in which the pressure of this square is the pressure of the new chapter announcing itself. The mental stretching is not incidental to the Uranus ingress, it is part of the ingress itself. Uranus entering Gemini is going to spend the next 7 years expanding Mercury's domain, which means it is going to spend the next 7 years asking your mind to contain more than it currently believes it can. Today's Mercury-Jupiter square is the first data point in that curriculum. The mind stretches, not beyond what it can handle, but beyond what it previously believed it could handle. And the difference between those two things is exactly the difference that Uranus in Gemini is here to teach you. The Uranus ingress into Gemini does not land identically for every sign. The house that Gemini occupies in each sign's chart determines the specific domain of life where the awakening arrives. Understanding where Uranus is now transiting in your chart is the first step toward understanding what the next 7 years of this cycle are actually asking you to open, disrupt, and ultimately rebuild on more genuinely true foundations. For Aries, Uranus has moved into your third house of communication, immediate environment, and the daily exchange of ideas. This is deeply personal territory. The third house governs the conversations you have most often, the way you speak and write and think out loud, the relationship between your mind and your immediate world. Uranus in your third house over the next 7 years will revolutionize how you communicate. Old ways of expressing yourself may feel suddenly constraining. New forms of language, new modes of exchange, new intellectual interests may arrive without warning and feel immediately, urgently necessary. Your relationship with siblings, neighbors, and the people you encounter in your everyday movements is also activated. Expect surprising turns in these dynamics. Expect your voice to become something you did not previously know it could be. The most important thing for Aries during this transit is to let yourself be surprised by what comes out of your own mouth. You will say things that astonish you. Let them be said. For Taurus, Uranus moves into your second house of material resources, values, and the relationship between who you are and what you have. The second house is not simply about money. It is about what you assign worth to and how the things you assign worth to either support or constrain your authentic existence. Uranus in this house for 7 years will shake the financial and material structures of your life in ways designed to align your material reality more precisely with what you actually value, rather than what you have been conditioned to accumulate. Expect the unexpected in financial matters. Expect sudden changes in income, in spending priorities, in your understanding of what actually makes you feel secure. The deeper teaching here is that security built on external conditions is not real security, and Uranus in your second house will demonstrate this repeatedly until you understand it through direct experience. What you are being pushed toward is a completely different and ultimately more authentic relationship with material reality. For Gemini, this is the most significant personal transit of your adult life. Uranus moves directly into your first house of identity, physical presence, and the fundamental expression of self. When Uranus transits the first house, the self that has been operating in the world begins to feel genuinely insufficient for what is trying to emerge. You may feel an urgency to change your appearance, your presentation, your name, the way you walk through space, the energy you lead with in any room. You may feel a restlessness so deep it is almost physical, a sense that the skin you have been living in is no longer the right fit. This is not a crisis. It is the most accurate sign that the transit is working. Uranus in your first house for 7 years will rebuild your identity from the inside out, burning away whatever was inherited, conditioned, or chosen from a place of fear, and leaving behind whatever is genuinely, irreducibly yours. It is an uncomfortable and extraordinary gift. For Cancer, Uranus enters your 12th house of the unseen, the unconscious, and the private inner world that exists beneath the surface of public life. The 12th house governs dreams, the hidden fears that drive behavior without being acknowledged, the spiritual life conducted in solitude, and the accumulated karmic material that has not yet been brought to consciousness. Uranus in this house is a slow, deep excavation. It brings to light what has been stored in the dark, not all at once and not always comfortably, but with a precision that is ultimately in service of genuine liberation. Over the next 7 years, Cancer, your inner world will undergo a complete renovation. Hidden patterns that have been running your life from below the level of conscious awareness will surface. Old fears that have been operating as invisible governors will be exposed and, once exposed, will lose much of their power. This is the transit that prepares you for everything that comes after it. It is doing deep, necessary work. For Leo, Uranus moves into your 11th house of community, friendship, collective vision, and the groups and networks you belong to. The 11th house governs your relationship with the wider world, beyond your immediate personal circle, your understanding of your role in something larger than the individual life, and the ideals and aspirations that you hold not just for yourself, but for the collective. Uranus in this house will fundamentally disrupt and reorganize your social landscape over the next 7 years. Friends and groups that once felt central may drift away, not through conflict, but through the natural outgrowing of alignment. New connections may arrive from unexpected directions, with unexpected people who share an orientation that is genuinely more alive than what you have been orbiting. Your vision of what is possible for the world is also expanding during this transit. You are beginning a chapter in which your individual gifts are being offered to something collective that is worth your most original and rebellious thinking. For Virgo, Uranus enters your 10th house of career, public reputation, and the expression of your life's purpose in the world. The 10th house governs the work you are known for, the direction of your professional life, and the way you contribute to the broader world through your specific skills and capacities. Uranus in this house for 7 years is one of the most disruptive and ultimately most liberating career transits available in the astrological vocabulary. If the work you have been doing is not genuinely aligned with what you are here to offer, Uranus will begin making that misalignment impossible to ignore. Sudden changes in employment, surprising opportunities that come from unexpected directions, the dismantling of career structures that have felt stable but are not truly yours, all of these are possible expressions of this transit. The deeper teaching is that your public contribution to the world is too important and too specific to be constrained by what is merely safe or expected. For Libra, Uranus moves into your 9th house of philosophy, belief, higher education, long-distance travel, and the search for meaning. The 9th house governs the framework through which you interpret your existence, the stories you tell about why your life has gone the way it has and what it is all ultimately for. Uranus in this house for 7 years will not leave a single belief system intact. This is not destruction. It is the specific kind of disruption that is necessary for genuine wisdom, the kind that cannot be received second-hand, but must be arrived at through direct experience, through the collision of what you thought you knew with what you actually encounter when you venture into genuinely new territory. Your philosophical world will expand dramatically during this transit. Your relationship to religion, spirituality, meaning, and the purpose of your existence will be completely reconstructed on foundations that are more genuinely yours than anything you were given in advance. For Scorpio, Uranus enters your 8th house of transformation, shared resources, psychological depth, and the intimate territory of what we merge with when we truly join our life with another. The 8th house is the domain of the things that are hidden, the things that belong to 2 people rather than 1, the things that cannot be spoken in ordinary conversation because they exist at a depth that ordinary conversation cannot reach. Uranus in this house for 7 years will disrupt the structures of intimacy and shared life in ways that are designed to bring greater authenticity to both. Financial arrangements involving other people may shift unexpectedly. The psychological territory of your deepest relationships will be renegotiated. Hidden dimensions of your own psyche, the ones that have been running your most significant connections from below the level of conscious choice, will surface and demand honest engagement. This is the transit of profound psychological renovation, uncomfortable and ultimately extraordinarily freeing. For Sagittarius, Uranus moves into your 7th house of partnership, committed relationship, and the one-to-one dynamics of significant others. The seventh house governs all the formal relationships in your life that involve genuine commitment and sustained engagement, romantic partnerships, business partnerships, close collaborations, and the contractual agreements through which you join your direction with another's. Uranus in this house for 7 years will bring radical change to the partnership landscape of your life. Some partnerships that have been operating on autopilot will be shaken awake or will simply end as their real nature becomes visible. New partnerships of an unusually original and unconventional character may arrive. Your understanding of what commitment means and what you are willing to sustain in a long-term partnership will be completely revised. The invitation for Sagittarius during this transit is toward partnerships that allow genuine freedom within genuine commitment, that honor both people's need for authentic self-expression rather than asking either to diminish themselves for the sake of the form. For Capricorn, Uranus enters your 6th house of daily routine, health practices, work habits, and the rhythms through which you sustain your body and your capacity to function. The 6th house is the domain of the ordinary, the recurring, the structural fabric of the everyday life. Uranus in this house is not interested in the ordinary. It will disrupt whatever has become mechanically routine to the point of numbness. Health matters may shift unexpectedly, pointing you toward approaches to your body and its needs that are significantly different from what you have previously practiced. Work environments and daily working rhythms may change in ways that are initially destabilizing, but ultimately more aligned with how your particular intelligence functions best. The deeper teaching here is that the structures of the daily life are not fixed, they are choices. And the choices that were made at an earlier stage of your life may no longer reflect who you actually are now. Uranus in the 6th house insists on updating the daily architecture to match the current self. For Aquarius, Uranus moves into your 5th house of creativity, self-expression, play, romance, and the relationship with children. The 5th house is the domain of the self in its most uninhibited expression, the part of you that creates not because it has been asked to, but because it cannot help it, that plays not because play is productive, but because it is necessary, that falls in love because the heart has its own momentum, that has very little to do with what the analytical mind would choose. Uranus in this house for 7 years will electrify your creative life in ways that are difficult to predict in advance, precisely because the nature of Uranian creative awakening is that it arrives from directions you did not anticipate and in forms you had not previously imagined using. This is not the transit that makes your existing creative practice better. It is the transit that may make your existing creative practice obsolete and replace it with something that is genuinely surprising, genuinely alive, and genuinely yours. For Pisces, Uranus enters your 4th house of home, family, roots, and the private foundation from which the public life is built. The 4th house is the most interior house in the chart, the domain of the private self that exists behind closed doors, of the inherited patterns of family and lineage that shape the self long before the self becomes conscious of their influence. Uranus in this house for 7 years is a complete reconstruction of the foundation. Living situations may change unexpectedly and more than once. The relationship with family, with the past, with the place you come from, will be disrupted in ways that, while uncomfortable, are clearing space for a foundation that is genuinely more stable because it is genuinely more true. What you discover during this transit is that the home you have been trying to build outward was only possible once you rebuilt it inward. And the inward rebuilding is what these 7 years are actually for. One of the most important things to understand about Uranus transits is what they are not. They are not chaos for its own sake. They are not disruption without purpose. Uranus does not awaken simply to destabilize. It awakens because the thing it is disrupting has reached the limit of what it can provide to the self that is continuing to evolve, and that self needs a new architecture before it can continue forward. Today, with Uranus freshly in Gemini and the Sun grounded in Taurus and Saturn building honest structure in Aries, the disruption that is beginning has a container. It has a purpose. It has, beneath its electric surface, a profound intelligence about what needs to change in you and in the collective in order for the next genuine chapter of growth to become available. This is not a reckless lightning strike. This is the kind of lightning that illuminates, that allows you to see in the flash of its light what was not visible in the ordinary conditions that preceded it. And then the light does not simply vanish. It stays in a changed form, in the altered landscape it revealed. The sun in Taurus is the ground beneath the lightning today. It provides the material stability, the earthed presence, the genuine patience of a sign that knows how to wait without becoming passive. Taurus does not panic under Uranian pressure. It does not rush to assign permanent meaning to what may still be in motion. It holds, it breathes, it receives the disruption and begins in its own time to understand what the disruption has made available. This is the correct response to a Uranus ingress, not to immediately know what everything means, not to make sweeping decisions about what must change before the changed conditions have had time to reveal their actual character, but to remain grounded and present and genuinely curious, allowing the new frequency to move through you before you attempt to organize it. Jupiter in Cancer adds its own stabilizing wisdom to the background of this day. Jupiter in Cancer is the emotional intelligence that knows how to receive large events without being overwhelmed by them. It knows how to find the genuine nourishment available in even the most disrupted of circumstances, the thread of meaning that runs through the apparent disorder, the sense of home that can be built anywhere if the inner life is genuinely habitable. Jupiter in Cancer today is holding, quietly and capaciously, all the people who are feeling the electricity of this day without yet knowing what to make of it. It is saying you have more capacity to receive this than you know. Your emotional ground is deeper than you have recently been asked to use. And what is arriving today is arriving because you are ready for it, even if your readiness is not yet visible to the part of you that is counting its readiness in purely rational terms. Saturn in Aries is perhaps the most important stabilizing force in today's sky. Saturn is the planet that ensures that what Uranus disrupts does not simply scatter into unproductive fragments, but becomes the raw material for something more honestly built than what preceded it. Saturn does not find Uranus comfortable. But Saturn has always understood that genuine structure that lasts, can only be built from what is actually true about a situation, and Uranus has a gift for exposing what is true that no other planet can match. Saturn uses that gift. It takes what Uranus reveals and asks, what can we build from this? What is the honest foundation that this disruption has uncovered? How do we construct something real from the material that the lightning has illuminated? Over the next 7 years, Saturn in Aries and then in Taurus and Gemini will be tracking alongside the effects of Uranus in Gemini, providing the structural intelligence that turns revolutionary insight into genuine, sustainable change. The revolutions of the mind that Uranus in Gemini will produce are not going to be merely theoretical. They are going to become real through the slow, patient, honest work that Saturn represents, through the grounded commitment that Taurus provides, through the embodied intelligence that knows the difference between a thought that is merely exciting and a thought that is true. You are beginning something today that is larger than today, and the ground is solid enough beneath the lightning to hold what is about to grow. Let the awakening arrive. Let the mind stretch to accommodate what it could not previously contain. Let the conversations that have been waiting finally find their words. Let the beliefs that have reached their limit begin, gently and without drama, to open at their edges. Uranus in Gemini has begun. The 84-year cycle is alive, and everything you come to understand in the years ahead has its first moment of orientation in this day, in this sky, in this exact quality of electrically grounded, beautifully inspired, expansively demanding opening that April 26th, 2026 is delivering into your life. The lightning has arrived, and the ground is ready.